The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth backing up President Trump, who says that Iran's nuclear sites were obliterated. That despite an early assessment from the U.S. intelligence community over the Defense Department that suggested Iran's nuclear program may have been just set back a few months. Hegseth is forcefully emphasizing the attacks were a success.
And the reality is you want to call it destroyed, you want to call it defeated, you want to call it obliterated, choose your word. This was an historically successful attack, and we should celebrate it as Americans, and it gives us a chance to have peace, chance to have a deal, and an opportunity to prevent a nuclear Iran, which is something President Trump talked about for 20 years, and no other presidents had the courage to actually do.
All right, let's begin our coverage this hour with CNN senior national security reporter Zachary Cohn, who was at the briefing at the Pentagon. Zach, this briefing had a very singular goal, didn't it?
Yeah, well, that certainly seemed to be true as far as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is concerned. He spent the majority of his remarks really emphasizing his and President Donald Trump's stated belief that these military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities completely obliterated the country's nuclear capabilities, and really deriding the media for recent reporting by CNN and confirmed by a host of others that a preliminary intelligence assessment did raise some questions and some uncertainty about the status of that nuclear program. And look, Pete Hegseth really leaning into what the president has said publicly. In fact, said immediately after these military strikes were conducted that they were not only successful, but they completely obliterated the country's program. That is not something that is reflected in the facts, and something that still remains a question even after today. We did pick up some new details, though, about what that confidence from Hegseth and Donald Trump seems to be based on, and that is based on the capabilities of this MOP, the massive ordnance penetrator, these bombs intended to penetrate deep under the ground, as well as the fact that they seem to have hit their desired targets at the Fordo facility. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, walked reporters through how this bomb works, showing a training video that illustrates how it penetrates the ground and then explodes. Also showing a graphic that does indicate that these bombs hit key ventilation shafts at the Fordo facility. But beyond that, though, we still don't know, and this is something Kane and Hegseth seem to acknowledge, we still don't know what the level of damage was that was inflicted not only beneath Fordo, but the other two sites that were targeted in these strikes. In fact, the other two sites, Natanz and Isfahan, were not even mentioned during today's press conference, despite the fact that they both are believed to have underground facilities that are used for nuclear purposes. So a lot of questions still today, but take a listen to what Pete Hegseth said when he was pushed on what is the underlying factor that makes him so confident Iran's nuclear program was in fact obliterated.
No one's under there right now. No one's under there able to assess, and everyone's using reflections of what they see. And that's why the Israelis, the Iranians, the IAEA, the UN, to a man and to a woman who recognize the capability of this weapon system, are acknowledging how destructive it's been.
So still, that's based on what all these players that are involved are seeing from the outside, but we still have yet to learn anything about what the actual damage on the inside and underground these facilities is.
Zach, what additional intelligence are we expecting today?
Yeah, Wolf, we've known the whole time and been reporting that an intelligence assessment about the damage that was inflicted will take days to weeks to be complete and get a fulsome picture. Really the key thing is if anybody can get boots on the ground at these sites to determine the level of damage to these underground facilities, and also finding out what was actually being stored there and potentially destroyed. We still don't know the status of that stockpile of already enriched uranium. That was something that Defense Secretary Hegseth today really sidestepped when he was pressed by reporters. We also don't know the status of those underground facilities potentially at the other two sites that were hit. Again, that was not even mentioned today. So still a lot of intelligence to be collected, assessed, and analyzed, but that does not stop Donald Trump from continuing to insist that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated.
All right, Zachary Cohn reporting for us from the Pentagon today. Zachary, thank you very, very much. Let's discuss what's going on with the retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson. Steve, thanks so much for coming in. You told me the other day that you thought the strikes themselves were an operational success, but a strategic mistake. Do you still believe that, based on what we heard this morning?
Yes, Wolf, I still believe that. I mean, we still don't know the battle damage assessment. We do not know the results of this incredibly successful attack. I mean, no one has taken that away from from the soldiers and the airmen that executed this mission. However, we still don't know what happened to the 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. We still do not know if there are 2 secret or 3 secret facilities in an area the size, 2.5 times the size of Texas. We still don't know what Iranian intentions are. Do they want to rebuild their program, or are they going to stand down? So they failed to answer any of this. What we saw today, Wolf, sadly, was more of a performance for an audience of one than it was for a briefing to the American people.
At the start of that news conference, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth lashed out at the news media, condemning outlets, including CNN, for reports that suggest the U.S. strikes on Iran weren't as effective as the Trump administration was initially saying. Listen to this.
Because you cheer against Trump so hard, it's like in your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump, because you want him not to be successful so bad, you have to cheer against the efficacy of these strikes. You have to hope maybe they weren't effective. Maybe the way the Trump administration has represented them isn't true. So let's take half-truths, spun information, leaked information, and then spin it in every way we can to try to cause doubt and manipulate the public mind over whether or not our brave pilots were successful.
All right, joining us now to discuss is CNN's chief media analyst, Brian Stelter. Brian, thanks for joining us. We should just note that Hegseth's attacks are false. CNN has reported that this was a preliminary assessment. Why is he now trying to say otherwise?
Right, and journalists are not the main story here. The main story is what you just covered, the impact of the U.S. strikes on Iran. The public still has a lot that wants to know about the impact of the strikes. But the administration is picking a fight with the press and casting legitimate journalism as unpatriotic right now. The Trump administration is not actually challenging the facts of what CNN reported. Instead, it's objecting to the existence of reporting. The Trump administration just wants everyone to repeat Trump's words instead of following up, instead of asking questions. And Hegseth was very emotional, almost spitting mad about this at the press conference this morning, very clearly trying to perform for the president. And we know that is partly why the president picked Hegseth from Fox in order to run the Defense Department. That kind of performance is what Trump was looking for. But it seems to me, Wolf, Trump is far from the first politician to use the military as a shield against fair-minded scrutiny. You know, Trump is saying that the B-2 pilots were devastated by this news coverage, but the reporting by CNN that was matched by the New York Times and other outlets was not the last word on the matter. It was really just the first word. There's so much more reporting to do on this topic. This is a very complex matter, even though Trump tried to make it sound simple on Saturday night. It's really important to note what CNN did not report. CNN did not report that this mission was a failure. Far from it. It may have turned out to be a tremendous success. We just don't know all the facts yet, and neither does the U.S. government. So this performance from Hegseth today, it's part of a pattern of attacking the press, trying to claim it's unpatriotic to ask these questions. But I think the history going back to Vietnam and more recently the Iraq War shows that it is quite patriotic to ask these questions and hold the government to account.
Yeah, we were simply reporting what was leaked to CNN by a U.S. official from that initial DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency report, and we reported it in context to be sure. You write in a new article for CNN, Brian, that questioning power is certainly patriotic. Explain for our viewers why it's necessary for the news media to report on these assessments, even if they are preliminary.
Because some of the biggest embarrassments for the American media of the last 50, 60 years have been times where the questions were not asked sufficiently, when people might have neutered themselves, might have quieted themselves because there was a rally around the flag effect. The best example, of course, being in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003. Now, this set of circumstances is very different. The U.S. airstrikes on Iran were courageous. The actions by the pilots were courageous. Gosh, I would love to hear from the pilots directly, by the way. There's a lot more reporting to do. It seems that Trump doesn't want that reporting to happen, and he's calling for firings and those sorts of things. Both CNN and the New York Times have strongly defended the reporting because it has not actually been challenged. The actual details have not been challenged. But, you know, as you've said on this program, Wolf, there's a lot more to learn about this subject, and that's what the public wants from the press. The public expects the press to do that work, dispassionately, neutrally, not looking for an outcome, but trying to find out what actually happened inside Iran.
And the details that CNN reported from that initial DIA report were in fact confirmed by current U.S. officials in the course of their public comments, even as they were trying to attack the news media for reporting all that. Brian Stelter, thank you very, very much for that.